of something you'd said the last time you were here, that if it weren't for their whiteness, if it weren't for their white maleness, would they sit in that seat? And I've incorporated those thoughts a number of times. And I will ask myself, if you weren't white, would you have this position? And then I flipped it. I said, well, if you weren't Black, how much more would you have had access to? And those types of stop myself in the moment, ask my question, it really helps me to sort of recalibrate where I'm at in whatever situation it is. And it helps me to really remember that we are dealing with some things that we have been taught to keep in the back of our mind, but should actually be at the forefront. And all of that was bubbling in my mind before we got to the appointment or the nomination of one Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. And you know, this is going to be a case where we have all types of questions about meritocracy, qualifications. Is she really as qualified as she should be? Was she an affirmative action pick? How does white mediocrity and know your place aggression show up when we are assessing the legacy of Ketanji Brown Jackson and what our hopes for her will be as she hopefully will ascend to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, it's going to play out as it often does, which is that so often what happens is really, really sneaky, partly because all of us have been trained to bring out really high standards when the person is not a straight white man. And so part of what I like to have us do is really be on guard for when we have extraordinarily high standards for Black women in these kinds of positions, because those standards can often become a kind of bludgeon. I mean, if I take it out, there are a couple different ways you have me thinking about this. One way is, you know, as a professor myself, part of what I guard against myself is when I get extra disappointed when a Black student hasn't read in my class African-American literature versus a white student. I recognize that as an unfair standard, not unfair standard, but an unfair disappointment. Taking it personally is a problem because my taking it personally is about me holding them to a certain standard because they're Black, and a white student just gets to be a student. Part of what I want us to get in the practice of doing is recognize that whiteness is never neutral. It is unfairly advantaged. And so whenever you pretend that it's neutral, you're ignoring the way that there's an unfair advantage. So with the Supreme Court example that you're using, if we act as if being a white person is a neutral thing, then we overlook all of the unearned advantages that came with being white for all of those predecessors. We overlook the way that they didn't have to be exceptional, that they were given exceptional opportunity, even if they weren't exceptional. We could even uncover all the ways that our educational system is advantaging white children from the playground, right? So it's like, if we act like whiteness is neutral, we're already bludgeoning everyone who's of color. So I just want us to get really used to paying attention to the unearned advantage of whiteness that makes it such that every time they're hired, for example, they're hired in a cluster. They get to come in with a whole group of people who are believing in their success, believing in their right to belong. They get to enter into a workplace where people naturally mentor them and don't see it as mentoring. They just see it as being a good colleague. But when I show up, all of a sudden, if they're mentoring me, they're giving me some kind of special help or something. No, they're actually usually resistant to mentoring me and making sure that I can be set up to fail. So I just want us to get really, really practiced at noticing how whiteness gives unearned advantages, and those unearned advantages turn into a bludgeon against people of color. The benefit of the doubt that you get when you are white, the benefit of the doubt that leads to 4th, 5th, and 6th chances, the benefit of the doubt that doesn't, like all of those benefits of the doubt based on nothing but whiteness translates into a bludgeon for people of color. And I want us to get really used to noticing that, because then we will notice how easy it is for us to be extra angry at Black women for every little thing. I want us to start recognizing that as part of the aggression. And if I can give one more example.
Please, yes.
the reason why it's so important for me that we think in terms of discourses and practices, what is most commonly said and done, is because it'll allow you to notice something real sneaky, like what we witnessed as a nation when we finally had a Black woman as First Lady and not as a servant in the White House. Ooh. Isn't it interesting that once that happened, all of a sudden the nation rallied behind The Help in 2009 as a book, this mediocre novel, in 2011 as a movie that became a runaway success, to the point where you had cookware based on The Help. You had all kinds of merchandise. It was an absolute phenomenon that you could not avoid. What I want us to notice is that here you have a victory, the success of a Black woman as First Lady. And what does the nation as a whole do? It reacts by saying, wasn't it a better time when Black women were in the servant role? You know, those 1960s maids who needed a little white girl to come and show them how to protest. Weren't those better times? Wouldn't you be a better American if you could appreciate the beauty that this movie is giving us? And none of us could avoid it, right? None of us could avoid it. So instead of having a national cultural response, Lurie, a national cultural response might have been a whole bunch of new movies about mocha moms, right? Stay-at-home Black mothers. I mean, that would make more sense, that Michelle Obama's position might inspire that. Or all kinds of movies and films about professional Black women. You know, it's not like she wasn't part of the University of Chicago Medical Center. I mean, those are the kinds of movies that maybe it would make sense that Americans would embrace, but instead we made that mediocre novel, The Help, in 2009, and the movie in 2011, we made it into an absolute phenomenon. I want us to recognize stuff like that as know your place aggression. Your success will lead to aggression as often as praise.
I hear you calling us to develop our white supremacy detection muscles. Dr. Mitchell, I hear you saying to us that we have had a set of muscles that were primed for detecting white supremacy, being able to mount an effective response. And those muscles have atrophied a bit. And it's difficult to see how white supremacy does what it does. And I feel you calling on us to develop, get in the gym, folks. Let's start developing those white supremacy detection muscles. And, you know, I have a question for you. And this might be, I think I have an example of know your place aggression. I'm not quite sure, so I'm going to toss it out to you. And y'all, we did not pre-plan this, but I just want to see, are my muscles flexing enough? Do I need to work on them a bit more? So let's see if Lurie's white supremacy detection muscles and know your place aggression detection muscles are on point. Okay. Over the weekend, there was the Critics' Choice Award. There was one woman, a white woman, who was given an award. She was a recipient of an award. I had never heard of this white woman before, but her name is Jane Campion, or Champion Campion. I've seen it a variety of ways. And she had won something phenomenal for directing something, whatever. I had never heard of this woman before, but as a part of her award, she says something to Venus and Serena Williams. And I thought, well, this ain't the Wimbledon Awards. It ain't this has nothing to do with tennis. I know enough about what this I'm watching to know it ain't got nothing to do with tennis. Why is she talking about Venus and Serena? And this white woman took this opportunity where she had been given this award, Dr. Mitchell, and she says to Venus and Serena, instead of focusing on herself and staying in her own sandbox, she says to Venus and Serena, basically, I mean, you all may be wonderful, but you don't play the boys like I do. So while you may be some of the greatest athletes the world has ever known, I compete against the boys. And so I am really the greatest of all time. Now, that was not a direct quote, but that's what my white supremacy detection ears heard when I heard her speak. Now, Dr. Mitchell, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure it out. So I might have gotten this wrong. Would that be an example of what you're talking about? Am I detecting white supremacy, know your place aggression in Jane Campion's words directed at Venus and Serena, who ain't had nothing to do with her award and should not have had their names in her mouth in the first place? I'm sorry, I'm a little hot.
Oh my goodness. What do we give? 4.0, summa cum laude, valedictorian, Lurie Daniel Favors is what we have before you, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
So if you'll indulge me.
Please, you have the floor, madame.
One way for me to process what that was for me to think about, and you already mentioned that I run. So as a runner, part of what I did was to found the Columbus, Ohio chapter of Black Girls Run. And as we gained traction, this was 2011, as we gained traction and got more media coverage, part of what would often happen is you would have white people talking about how, kind of ridiculous it was that we existed to support Black women and Black runners more generally, because, look at the top runners, the top marathoners are Black. So isn't this ridiculous? Whoa. And part of what is powerful about that, right? As you think about common discourses and practices, part of what's powerful about that is that you take the example of this exceptional Kenyan, for example, marathoner, you take their exceptional success and use it as a bludgeon against me and suggest that there's nothing about the running community that doesn't support me, given that this, Kenyan person is at the top. You're ignoring the fact that in normal running circles, the majority of people are white. So part of what that did is it took this exceptional example and then it made it equal to your success as an average runner as a white person. That's similar to what she did. And so here she is talking about her amateur tennis experience, and that becomes the justification for bringing them up. So here you are taking exceptionally successful Black women and equating it to your amateur tennis prowess. I want us to see the different levels of this. Not only are you ignoring how exceptional their success is by equating yourself, but then you're also demoting how much it took and how much they had to overcome. So I want us to see both of those as a kind of aggression. And that is part of what made what she did disgusting. But here's the other part for me. When you think in terms of discourses and practices, words and deeds, what is most commonly said and done, part of how we can understand what happened there is that white people are encouraged to only relate to people of color in condescending ways. That's the reason it makes sense that she can pull them out of the atmosphere in her conversation, but only if she can do it in a condescending way. Because this country does not teach, well, actually not just this country, right? Because she's from New Zealand. Whiteness as a construct, as a worldwide construct, is designed to make sure that I can hold myself to the lowest possible standard, especially when it comes to anybody who isn't considered white. That is what we just saw. All of that mental acrobatics, it's not acrobatics when everything is teaching you that the only way to relate to anyone who isn't white is in terms of reminding them of their proper place. And you know what? It also reminds me of Toni Morrison's quotation about how much of a pathology whiteness is, that if you are tall only if you're standing on somebody else, that is what whiteness teaches. And so I want us to understand discourses and practices, the most commonly said and done things, is one way for us to understand that you don't even have to have intentional malice to operate in ways that are incredibly aggressive and violent. That's the reason I focus on aggression. I'm not always trying to attach it to a body, right? That's the reason your Black teller example is so powerful. I'm not attaching it to a body. I want us to understand what is most commonly said and done and how violence is woven into that. Because language always, Lurie, language is going to always reveal, if you pay attention, power dynamics and relationships. So what she just showed you is the power dynamic that's built in and the relationship to anybody who isn't white that's built in.